Thanks to everyone who's joining today. I wish I could be there with you in person, and I hope for that soon. As probably all of us. I'm going to talk today, obviously, about how to build our marketing roadmap, why it's important. Um, this will be pretty free flowing and conversational because what I'm going to take you through is both a combination of a left brain and a right brain process. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. It's always good to kind of know who you're talking to. So basically, I'm passionate about helping people learn, grow, and expand every day. So what that means is I really love to help people, and I love to help them with their businesses and the problems that they're trying to solve, because I look at these things as a puzzle and want to remove the obstacles that people might have in getting the results or the impact or build the brand that they want to have. My expertise is in defining, growing, and expanding brands, strategy, customer insight, so qualitative research, secondary research, some quantitative. And I've spent the majority of my career working with Fortune 500 companies, from Adidas to the launch of MSNBC many moons ago when it was part of Microsoft. So my experience kind of runs a gamut, and I'm hoping to infuse that into what we're going to discuss today. And I really want to take time to just say that it's nice to meet you virtually, and that I appreciate your time, and thank you for being here. I know that there are so many different things pulling on our time these days, and so I always want to take the time to acknowledge folks who are here and want to learn. Quick note about 2 Octobers. Maggie covered off on some of this as well, but really 2 Octobers, the purpose is to make the world a better place. And while that sounds very lofty, I think we can also look around the world and see where there are things that are not working or not as optimal as we'd like them to be. And our way of doing that is by cultivating growth for values-driven organizations. We provide teaching and digital marketing services in search, SEO, content, social, email, and analytics. And this year in June, we became a certified B Corporation, which I encourage you to research and check out. It's been incredibly rewarding for the company. So let's talk first about purpose and outcomes, kind of what we're going to do today. So the first thing we're going to do from a purpose standpoint is understand what a marketing roadmap is. A lot of language, and I'll cover off on this in a few minutes, there's a lot of language that's thrown around in the marketing world and in business in general: jargon, KPIs, OKRs, roadmaps, plans. And so what we're going to try to do is to crystallize what that is and help you figure out how to best deep dive into your business to create a fresh strategy to drive impact, not dive impact. And then how to create your own marketing roadmap. I have some tools for that, and we'll discuss that as well. So first things first, let's talk terminology. And I found this amusing. You may or may not. It's Tom Hanks. And I call him Captain Jargon. And I want to, while that is part of a joke, it's also to demystify some of the language that's thrown around, because I do think that gets in the way sometimes of making connections with other stakeholders in the organization so that they understand what it is that you're doing and how your marketing program, plan, strategy, tactic ladders up to the business. And no matter what size company you're at, or if you're a nonprofit organization, we always want to make sure that our marketing goes hand in hand with the business, so that we can look at any marketing campaign or tactic or program and say, yeah, I understand how that is going to feed the business. And so Captain Jargon is going to demystify a few things. I found this quote really interesting because over the course of my career, I've definitely noticed that strategy gets thrown around as a word a lot. And when you ask people what it is, even if you look it up online, you get a lot of different answers. And this quote was really interesting to me. The biggest problem with the way organizations think about strategy is that they confuse it with plans. And I think that's very true. And I want to talk about that a little bit more, but breaking it down, strategy, in my experience, because it may vary depending on your background and what you learned and what you picked up on the job, but to me, the strategy is always the how. We understand what the business problem is. Maybe it is grow market share by 20% in the frozen food category for our hot meals. We understand that. But how are we going to get there from a marketing standpoint? What are the guiding principles that are going to lay the foundation for the resources that we use to meet goals, right? A lot of times what I see, particularly over the past 10, I would say, kind of the rise of social media and Google it and you can figure out how to do it, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for every tool or technique in marketing, but sometimes those tactics, and I'll get into that in a second, are floating without a strategy. So for example, if I was going to put up a Facebook campaign to promote the frozen food that I was just talking about, how does that Facebook campaign relate to the business goal? What is the strategy? Why did we decide to use Facebook? Why did we decide to use social? What do we know about our customer or our prospect and how they conduct business, or how they conduct their shopping? That's kind of the intermediary layer that should direct the activities, that I find a lot of times the strategy layer isn't that deep. And to my fellow marketers, what I want to say is, if you want to make a big impact both internally and externally, and you want to make sure that people internally understand what marketing's doing, where they're spending their time, and where they're spending their money, it's really important to have that bridge between the strategy and the business. And in this case, I'm referring to the marketing strategy. If you're a solopreneur, the same applies. You want to get a certain amount of customers, let's say consulting customers, over the next 6 months. How are you going to go about doing that? And so when you start to ask the how question, that's when you flipped into strategy mode. So you're starting to look for what are those guiding principles. Secondarily, tactics, as I was saying, are the actions. Those are the things that you're actually going to go out and do, and you know what they are, when you're going to roll them out, how you're going to measure them. And you kind of need both to be successful. Now, I say that, and I know someone's like, well, I've had a lot of tactics and they've gained momentum. And I would say, okay, every business situation is different. We'll talk about that. But having a strategy really helps ground why we're spending time, energy, and resources on a specific activity. And it's just a great proof point. The roadmap, which is a term that gets thrown around a lot as well, is a visual representation of the marketing plan, which shows how the strategic marketing initiatives tied to the business goals, and what's missing there is, and how the tactics fall out of that. So if you can imagine kind of like a cascading, like waterfall, you've got your business goals at the top, grow market share. Then we've got, okay, how are we going to leverage strategy? What is our strategy to do that with the market? How are we going to increase? And then what are the tactics underneath that? And then the roadmap is the container or the anchor for all of those elements. And it's your blueprint as well. You have that and you're like, okay, these are the things that we're intending on doing. Here's why. And that's all based on foundational research. So this next slide is really about keeping in mind you're an original. And what does that mean? What that means is every business is different, obviously. They have unique challenges, goals, stakeholders. Maybe you run maybe you're a marketing team at a food company and your CEO comes out of biotech and he or she decided to dabble in running a food company. You're going to have unique challenges in communicating with that stakeholder or investor, right? How do you communicate the strategy? So every plan and program is different. And so what I'm here to help you with today is to walk through a process to generate your marketing roadmap. But I want you to keep in mind that nothing is absolute. Now, the positive of nothing being an absolute is also that there's opportunity and room for you as marketers to give yourself permission to think expansively and creatively. So what does that mean? It can mean anything from a billboard campaign to a breakthrough digital marketing campaign to email, but allowing yourself to really step deep into the business and understand the dynamics and the people that you're selling to, and give yourself permission to test and try new things. Maybe there's something that you saw in culture that is really popular right now. Like obviously we're all on Zoom. Maybe your specific strategy has to do with Zoom because you have a technology offering. So just giving yourself room as marketing to be able to think creatively about how you approach the strategy, what the perspective of your prospect is, and how to roll that out. I can tell you that the strongest marketing campaigns take calculated risks and attempt to wake up the market. And I'm not talking about Nike, and I'm not talking about Apple. I'm talking about looking at things differently than the competition, or finding some area that has been unexplored and going with it, and how to do that in a measured way. So permission for you to be creative, put your original ideas, to understand that your business is different and it's not one size fits all. And that's actually also the benefit of us being marketers versus bean counters in the organization, although we're required to think like bean counters sometimes. So why do we need these things? We went over the terminology. We've talked a little bit about strategy, tactics, and the map itself, but why is it important? So this is a quote that I remember hearing many times in a few different places that I've worked, but I don't know where I'm going, but I'm making excellent time, or we don't know where we're going, but we're making excellent time. So why is this here? This is here because it's to reinforce the importance of having a plan and being able to share that plan. Even if your plan is tiny and you're going to take one action over the next 6 months based on the budget and the resource and et cetera, that's fine. But consistency and having a roadmap is key. And I think people intellectually understand that. But then what happens is a different stakeholder from the organization says, hey, marketing, we really need to sponsor this event. And you're like, that isn't on strategy. It's good to be able to have the actual strategy and the roadmap and show how the dollars are being invested so that people understand that, so that you don't wind up with we don't know where we're going, but we're making excellent time. And that speaks to chaos a little bit too. So benefits of a strategy and roadmap, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the first off is efficiency. Understand what program to invest in and when not to invest. So I know sometimes as marketers, we get approached by a lot of different vendors or programs or partnerships, and they sound really good. There's a little bit of shiny object syndrome that goes on too, where it's like, oh, that's really cool. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should carve a little bit of the budget out. Or maybe the CEO, maybe she's really into golfing. And even though you're selling potato chips, it doesn't make sense to sponsor the golf. Well, when you have a strategy and a roadmap that you can articulate, you can weigh the pros and cons of those specific programs that come in, and you can decide, is this specifically going to get us to goal? Now, I'm sure you probably do that kind of off the cuff as it comes in, but imagine being able to articulate that to the organization or whoever the investors are, or whoever's on the other end and who is weighing the success of the marketing. This is your ability to say, well, it doesn't make sense to do golfing because we have X amount of budget and we're selling chips and no one's eating chips. But to be able to show that and articulate where you're going changes the conversation internally. I find a lot of times marketing is everyone's favorite toy, meaning we can all do that. Well, I can put up a Facebook post and I can do this and I can do an email campaign, and there's tools that are really easy to use. And what you're doing is not that complicated. And that's what external folks show up with a lot of ideas outside of the team. But it's important for us to be able, as marketers, to be able to stand up for what we're doing and demonstrate the value. And I would say we're under the gun more than most departments because while people understand that there's a contribution to the business through the work we do, sometimes it can also be the line item that gets cut off of the budget, depending on your organization. So going to the next point around communication, showing that progress, why you have the plan, how that is directly contributing back to the business and the business goals is really key. It's also important to gain support from internal and external stakeholders. If you can articulate what you're trying to do and why your product or service is special, you're going to gain more support and understanding. And when people understand something, that's when the keys start to really unlock and you get more of that support. You get people who are using the hashtag for the campaign that you just put out, or people who are participating more. So you have a new product that you're launching and you need to convince sales to jump on. right? These are the ways to gain momentum, is to communicate what it is that you're doing. A lot of times I find with marketing, there's a what have you done for me lately? And the strategy and the roadmap are a good way to communicate that. The other thing is, if your program goes across the company, so there's coordination required. So say you have I'm just making these examples. Say you have a coupon program or a discount, let's say discount program. Well, sales probably needs to know that's going on. Or if you have one salesperson, they need to know what's going on. So by sharing a plan and communicating what that is across the company. And I would also advise selling that or socializing that plan with people who are wondering what marketing's up to is really important. And then you get their buy-in and they understand why they're being pulled on to help with these things. And then lastly, really just impact whatever process you have right now. How are you tracking progress? How are you showing the impact of your marketing against the business objectives? Every organization is different, as I mentioned, based on size, stakeholders, whether or not it's public, private, et cetera. Maybe you like to do a quarterly review of that. I would recommend you bring the strategy and the roadmap to the table and you say, this is where we started. Here's the strategy that we took. Here was the assumptions that the data that we used to inform that. And here's where we are on the roadmap. We're in the first quarter, and here's the progress against the business. That is a much different conversation than we're going to send out 4 emails this month, and we expect the response rate to be X, and we think we're going to get this many people to the landing page. It doesn't mean that information's not important, but if you can show someone the view of where it's going and how these tactics line up underneath that view of where you're going, you're going to get a lot more support and understanding and possibly budget if you can demonstrate that impact. And I know one thing that as a marketer, we always get asked about is, how can we increase budget? Like, well, you got to show the results. Okay, well, what kind of results? Well, by connecting really tightly that business objective to that strategy and tactic, you're going to be able to have that conversation much more easily. Any questions so far? Okay, no one's falling asleep yet. Okay, we'll just keep going.
We're good. We're good.
We're good. Okay. Where to start? Oop. So we're going to talk about the roadmap components. It's not too different than traditional marketing planning, but there are obviously new tools and things that can be added into the mix. The first component that I'll walk you through is the internal analysis. The second will be the external analysis. So looking inside and outside, and then what are some tools that can help us? Before I dive into the roadmap components, another thing I want to say kind of as guidance for marketers like ourselves is that it's really important that you understand the business as best as you can. Not just, okay, here's what the marketing program's doing and here's what the traffic is with the site, but what is your customer churn rate? Do you guys lose customers a lot? Where are the customers coming from? How did they hear about us? How is customer care doing? So if you launch a new product and you don't know that 30% of the product that goes out there, I doubt this, is defective, a social media campaign could be impacted by that, right? So I've always found for strong marketing leaders and people who want to be leaders, one of the big quivers that you can have, I'm using the metaphor wrong, but one of the big arrows that you can have in your quiver is to know the business as best as you can so that you can articulate how what you're doing connects. Just because of, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, but just because of well, we know better than you. I've gotten a lot of pushback in the past around that. It's like, well, actually, no, I've got all the data here. And so we're going to walk through that. And what I'm trying to do by bringing up some of these anecdotes is to, I don't like the word arm, but, and I guess in a sense it is to arm you against people kind of asking what marketing's doing, because it can seem squishy to people on the outside. The way I look at the components of the marketing roadmap, I definitely think of it as a business health checkup. Anytime I'm working on a new campaign or client or pitch, I'm wanting to look at their business from multiple aspects and multiple lenses and looking for the overall health. If I hear a lot of, oh, it's good, it's good, it's good, I kind of still am looking underneath, kind of, there's always a loose thread somewhere. And you want to know what that is as a marketer if you're going to push products into market, right? And sometimes people don't know what the problem is external to the marketing team, or they do know, but we don't have a good solve. And so just going into this process is like, this is a health check. It's not to tell people, oh, this is good or bad about the business, like you did wrong necessarily, or the product's broken or service is broken, but it's more just to say, we've taken an exhaustive look and we've identified what's working, and we want to highlight those aspects. So as I mentioned, the first step is to kind of look at the internal view and to go deep here. And sometimes that requires time. And I know a lot of times, due to the pace of how we work, the pivot of this year, how things have been very different, or business as unusual, as I like to say. You don't always have the luxury of time, but I would encourage you, if you can take the extra time, you might just find the gold that you need to go back to earlier what I was saying around creative ways to take your product, brand, or service to market. So the way to do that is to get into the dirt. Go ahead. Do you want to comment? Okay. So what I mean by getting into the dirt is just really digging around and looking at what's happening, and to be very curious. So what products and services are driving revenue? Why? How does that compare to what's happening, or how the executives think about what's happening at the company, or the investors? What is not driving revenue? Why? And it's really important to ask that why question, and not necessarily of folks external to marketing or folks outside of yourself, but really kind of scratching at what are those drivers, because you never know if one of those drivers could provide you with a new idea for the roadmap. What is most important to the business right now? This is kind of a big one. And it tends to happen with mid-sized organizations a little bit more. You'll have sales who's really excited to sell something. You'll have the CEO who he or she may or may not be excited to sell the thing that sales is excited by. And then there's marketing who's been told, oh, we need to market something else different entirely. You can have three facets or three groups who all are on a completely different page. And so that's when the marketing roadmap becomes more important. Okay. I'm going to get to this question in a second. So just going back to that, that's another reason why you need the roadmap. It's to socialize the plan and to vet whether or not these things are areas of importance, and also to understand the motivations of the different stakeholders, right? Sales, they're trying to hit their number for the quarter. They're typically short-term, quick hit, depending on the product and service. So they may not be too concerned about what marketing's doing, because they've got to get their sales. The executive might be excited from the last conference or whatever he or she went to, and really wants to talk about this theme in marketing, but maybe you don't understand why that's important. So getting everyone on the same page is important. You may not be able to get the salespeople off of what it is that they want to sell, but just knowing those mindsets and how they relate to the business patterns and what is of most importance to the business right now is really key. Because you'll have a lot of headaches later when people are looking at results and like, well, how did we get here? Well, we ran a campaign to talk about X. Well, why didn't you do the thing that sales was doing? So that congruency with different stakeholders inside and outside is really important. If it's a stakeholder of one, that's totally fine and super easy, but you'd still need a roadmap to be able to measure twice and cut once on your activities that you're going to do. So I'm going to answer a question from Janelle. So the question is, can you relate to what would be the leading step in the roadmap for a startup that doesn't have the historical data? I would be looking externally. I'd be looking at the category, the competition, the conversations that are being had. If the companies are public, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but you can also look at 10K reports, press releases. You'll have to put together a proxy of what you think might happen, and to set up a measured test within your roadmap, right? So maybe, and I see this all the time, Someone's like, mothers are the target. We know that mothers buy snacks for their kids. Well, then we go into the data, we find out, oh, it's really teenagers and 20 somethings that are buying the product. So how do we address that? We might run a test, right? And you guys are probably familiar with that from a purely digital marketing standpoint. But when you're starting from scratch, it's working with the data that's available in the external world and then running some calculated tests. So the other thing to understand is kind of the stakeholders, as I've been alluding to kind of throughout the presentation, what is of the utmost concern and why? If there's someone who's keeping the budget, you need to be able to demonstrate what you're doing and how that's adding up. And I don't know if people know this, but in the last few years, I think the average tenure of a chief marketing officer has shrunk to 16 months. And I bring that up because it's a tough game. Things move very quickly. And if you don't take the time to dig deep and build foundational relationships and really understand your product and your consumer, it can be challenging within the organization. And then lastly, on the internal review, you got to have a reality check. So, and I see this a lot, and I don't see it from marketers. I see it more from clients who are not marketers. They'll say, I need to move 10,000 units by the end of the year. And, we have, I'm just going to make this up, $10 or something, like the equivalency of one thing is very, very small and the other thing is very, very big. And there's a desperation. And so it's really important when you're looking at either internal business patterns, to really be upfront and be like, hey, based on past performance or what we know, if we're at the hypothesis kind of stage, this is not a realistic goal. And while that sounds really easy, sometimes when the person who controls the purse strings or who really wants to hit that number, or maybe business is trending down, it's really important to factor that into your roadmap. Are the programs that you've outlined realistic in what we're anticipating that they're going to deliver? And if they're not, either caveat it or look to a different tactic, or maybe your strategy has some holes in it. A little bit more on the internal view. It's really important to also look at what have you and the team been doing. I know sometimes we can fall in love with specific marketing tactics, like I love email or I love social. We've been doing social forever, but have you really looked under the hood to see how it's working and how that fits into the buying cycle? And when the head of the company is talking about who the customer is, do those things align or are they disjointed? Because if they're disjointed, maybe you need to take a second look at that tactic that you love and determine whether or not you should keep doing it, even if that's your core skill, maybe that you offer. One other thing that I really love is looking at things on a quarterly basis and saying, what should we stop doing? Like we tested that thing with the t-shirt giveaway or the X campaign and it didn't work. And then what does the data tell us in terms of what we need to start, or what do we need to continue doing? And then why? Always be thinking about why and your support points, whether they're for yourself as a party of one, or whether you're part of a larger organization. Just make sure you have your rationale, and then continually asking yourself, and you're going to hear me say this a little bit more, how does the marketing support the business goals? Because if it's just, I want to put out a press release and you can't sync it up to anything, and say you're a party of one and you're going to go put it on the wire and it costs $1,000 to get it out on the wire nationally, that's a gap, right? Is that supporting the business goal of getting customers? How does that press release impact the funnel? Maybe it doesn't impact at all. Maybe it impacts media pickup and you get traffic to the site, but is it the right traffic? So just taking the time to just measure twice and cut once is really important. Also, so taking a pause for a second, there's a data element to all of this, and collecting and understanding and synthesizing. But then there's also a human piece of it is, what do you keep hearing either yourself, if you're the business owner or a vice president or the founder of the company, say? Because those are the priorities. What is your priority? If do or die, you have to be in the market in spring, what is the fastest way to do that and why? and understanding, when you have delivery problems and that sort of thing is really important. So now we're going to shift into talking about the external view. Folks, this is not net new information per se, but it's a reminder. I was actually looking for some data in preparation for this presentation from Harvard Business Review, and I was looking for a stat to talk about the fact that 30% of businesses don't dig deep into the competition. Like, they know that the competition is out there, they know what they sell, they know the URL, but they don't necessarily look at the pace of what's happening. When are they announcing things? What is the cycle for those respective businesses? How are they messaging those businesses? And where is the opportunity for your business among that? That's a keen eye to be able to take a look at those things. Also, what marketing channels are they using? If you're always on Facebook and they're always on LinkedIn, what does that mean? I'm not saying Facebook is necessarily wrong or that LinkedIn is right, but what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for them? I used to do this activity when I would train folks on strategy, where I'd have them look at a piece of advertising or media, and I would say, what is the strategy that they're trying to communicate? And I would encourage you, time notwithstanding, if you can look at an ad for the competition, what do you see about it? First of all, where are they running it? What are they saying? Why? Right? Who are they reaching? And what does that tell you about your roadmap and where you should be focusing? Does that mean you should focus in the same area because it's cost of entry for you to be in that category? Like, oh, we better talk about, I'm running out of examples, straws, because everyone knows that straws are essential for picnics and we're a picnic product. So it looks like a straw. All the competitors are talking about straws. So we need to have straws just to be in the game, cost of entry. But then we need to talk about how our product is additive or better. So just make sure that you're using that, because that can be a really great source of information and broader understanding. I've also sat in on customer support calls for clients when customer service is working with a customer to understand an issue with a product. You can go as deep as you want, again, time notwithstanding, to understand and get to the, I use the word truth loosely, but sorry, text there. But what is the external truth? Because a lot of times, in my experience, I find that people get really excited about what's going on within the company, and we don't look outside to say, well, is that really reality, or is just that we're just so excited about our product that and proud about it that we've got blinders on. You want to take the blinders off. That's the purpose of looking at competition and understanding the customer experience. Take the blinders off so you know what you're really working with. Another good source of information, maybe your company's private, but maybe one of your competitors is public, is to look at what they talk about in press releases, SEC filings. There's a filing called a 10K that's also, it's separate from the annual report. It gets filed on a quarterly basis. Sometimes those will tell a narrative of what's happening with the business or where they're focusing. Granted, it's public information, so it might be a little slanted, but it also tells you where they're going to invest. And that can give you a leg up in terms of, okay, well, maybe the market is pivoting to that kind of product. Maybe we do need to have an offering, or, hey, we already have that offering. Maybe we should be highlighting that. Looking at promotions is also pretty telling. If your product is $200 and they're offering it for $100, why is that? If it's a new product, maybe it's because they're having a hard time getting customers. Okay, so how does that impact your roadmap, right? And then market development, as I was just saying, is it a new market or existing market? A lot of times with technology being so disruptive, I think technology's changed a lot of markets. There are a lot of new businesses and niche industries popping up. So understanding whether or not it's a new market is really important. And then one question that I always ask any client or we're working on plans is, what kind of seasonal patterns are going on? Yes, there's the obvious, holidays. Maybe we'll be selling more e-com products because people have their holiday gifts. But what else happens? Like if you are selling a conference to accountants, how might seasonality be impacted by that? Well, during tax season, you're not going to want to run it. So that's an obvious example, but the point is, what are those paces and cadences? Right now, I would say seasonality for 2020 is a little bit thrown off because of some of the stuff from COVID. And I've been hearing from different clients, they had a soft Q2, but they expect to make it up in Q4. And that this pattern is a little irregular, a lot more summer business coming in when they typically don't. So just factoring in those kinds of things into your roadmap is really key. So you want to be like the doctor. You're checking out the patient, whatever metaphor you want to use, kicking the tires. You want to look at this thing all the way around and be able to go deep if you can. So the next step is tools. Become a company expert on what's happening inside and outside within your business or category. And I've talked about a little bit, but a good idea can come from anywhere. You never know when you're going to see something and be like, oh, we should take that and leverage it for the marketing. Oh, I want to become the expert or the right hand to my boss because I want to know the business better than they do. I want to understand the customer better. Like, challenge yourself as a marketer to look at those different dynamics. So some of the tools that I've got here are probably more or less familiar, but there's a great tool called SEMrush, which is very data heavy. I use it in a pretty limited capacity, but I know that within 2 Octobers, it's pretty heavily used. I don't even know how to really describe it because I don't use it for SEM. I use it to social track, to understand kind of sentiment and how topics are heating up. And I'll take a cue from those topics to figure out how we can insert a brand into those kinds of conversations, and not necessarily socially. If everyone's talking about masks because of COVID, how can I maybe connect to that macro topic and understanding the volume of searches and content posts and engagement, et cetera, ad nauseum is really important to validate any assumptions. I also use Alexa.com. It is not the Alexa that connects to the Echo. It's the same company. It is Amazon, but it's another data source that will give you insight into conversations. The other thing I'll do is if I come up with a few hypotheses for my roadmap based on what I think the customer might be doing, I'll run it through Google News Alert. I'll run queries. I'll look at the companies and just get a sense of what is the tenor, what is being said, what is interesting, what could we act on, what could we get ahead of and exploit before anyone else does. I mentioned 10K reports. Customer care requests are good to look at to understand, are they always complaining or are they always happy, or is there somewhere in the middle, and where do we fall down? Because if the CEO says, hey, I want to market the heck out of X functionality, and you go into the customer care requests and you see that everyone's complaining about the functionality, that might not be the top thing that you want to emphasize in your marketing roadmap. The other thing I like to look at is sales win and loss reports. This depends on the size of the organization. If you're a party of one, you'll know why or why not you're winning business. But I like to use it as a barometer for how the product or service is being received by the external world. Again, looking for that truth. And I find understanding why we lose and why we win is really key. Qualitative research is something that I'm a huge fan of. And that's basically the process of talking to customers and understanding qualitatively, and prospects, understanding what the motivations are. And I use that as a way to stress test the hypotheses that we have. So my experience is sometimes people in organizations get very excited about features, functionalities, categories, markets, and I'll either get a gut feeling that might not be true externally, or I'll want to validate that before we spend money. And so I will design a qualitative research study and talk to people about their experience. Sometimes I will do qualitative research to also understand stakeholders, to get their perspectives as well, because I'm always looking for that truth. What is the goal within the organization? And then what is sort of the reality externally? And then where those things converge, is there opportunity there? And that's really the heart of strategy by the definition of what I've shared with you guys today. For technology, I'm a huge fan of Gartner and Forrester. So if you're selling software or you want to understand a specific technology sector, that is a really great place to start. Yes, those do require paid subscriptions, but there's a ton of free information that they publish. So I can tell you in all the years I've been doing this, I haven't needed to buy a survey. I've been able to find the information. Sometimes clients will have a Gartner or Forrester subscription, so I'll actually take them through the marketing strategy and the roadmap, a Gartner person or a Forrester person to validate that, which can be really fun because they're on the bleeding edge of what's happening in a specific tech sector. And they also talk to tons of clients, so it's a great validation point. And then lastly, I'm a huge McKinsey nerd and I get a ton of different industry updates. So no matter what category you're in, from consumer to electricity to engineering to HEPA filters, McKinsey typically has an industry study, and they keep their pace on that, and they publish even more free information than Gartner and Forrester. So that's a laundry list of tools. And again, what we're looking for is a few things. So we want to be an expert. We want to know what's going on inside and out. We want to be able to have support for our strategy and for the roadmap we're building. We want to be able to look at the tactics in a concerted way and say, like, these do or do not make sense based on everything that I've read and what I know about the business. So you're using this information to get a really full picture of your patient, if you want to go back to the metaphor that I was talking about earlier. And it takes time, and it can also be super fun. And it can also be the thing that leads you to a really interesting sort of breakthrough marketing idea. And I don't mean expensive marketing ideas. It can be anything. So the next step is synthesis. Does anyone have any questions before I go too much further? Hopefully you're still like so quiet. This was my attempt to find a cool picture that demonstrated synthesis, because we just talked about a ton of data points, external, internal, people's opinions, qualitative research, executives, stakeholders. You're really having to get your arms around all of this. And it's hard to sometimes be impartial to what you're reading. And what I mean by that is, I'll speak for myself, getting very excited about a specific facet of data and kind of falling down the rabbit hole a little too far and getting to analysis paralysis. So try to pull yourself out if you fall into the hole, and just remember that you've got your business objectives. So even as you're diving into these different views and looking for information to support your strategy, being able to kind of be objective about that is really key. And to trust that the process and that the idea will come together. You will start to get a visual of like what the challenges for your specific product or service and what the opportunities or ways in are. And so, Jane Green, who I do not know, so the pieces of the puzzles come together when you least expect it. And it's very true. In my experience, sometimes when I do a deep dive like this, I need to put it away for a day, tuck it into a drawer, and then come back a few days later and allow it to kind of just marinate, and not try to act on it immediately, and allow the strategy or the way to kind of emerge. So be kind to yourself as you go through the process. So once you've gathered all the information, common themes are going to come up. And I've got a few examples here. Customers really love us, but we tend to be out of stock a lot on X specific SKUs. Sales is losing business because our pricing is too high. We've lost 8 of the 10 deals due to pricing. Okay, so as a marketer, how do I act on stock and how do I act on pricing? You might be saying, you're like, I'm not in charge of pricing, or I'm not in charge of the inventory that literally ships out the widgets. You're not, but maybe what that means is figuring out what the core issue is and either surfacing that issue and saying, hey guys, the marketing campaign might not be ready to go out just yet because we've had a lot of inventory issues. And I know this year in particular, there's been a lot of inventory challenges with disruption of supply chain due to the virus. But, you want to have eyes wide open, because if the CEO or founder, owner, investor, or you is like, I got to get 10,000 widgets out of here, and you're always out of stock, there's a core issue with your patient that you need to look at and make sure that you have solved for that, because that's going to impact your campaign. If pricing is too high, yeah, you probably can't walk up to the business owner and say, hey, these things are really expensive, but you can work with sales to maybe tease out what else is going on, right? How are they going to market? Who are they selling to? Are they selling to the target that we're marketing to? Because if they're not, there's something that's out of joint there, obviously, but maybe there's a way to bridge that gap. So in a way, as I'm speaking with you all today, what's coming to mind for me is it's almost like to be successful in marketing is like you're the business owner. And for some of you, you may be the business owner today, but it's really important to kind of have eyes and ears on for the success of your roadmap and your strategy and your tactics that you're taking. Another one is, and I tend to see this a lot, which is, sales in specific markets, but not anywhere else. Maybe the business is born in Milwaukee, but we don't sell any in Milwaukee. Well, why is that? Is it because people don't know that it exists? Is it some other problem, right? And if another example is, the competition is always spending on social and radio. Okay, well, how does that impact our strategy? So just being able to synthesize and strain out what the themes are and what jumps out to you as interesting or curious or broken. The point isn't to like find everything that's broken, but the point is to trust the fact that when you surface certain things, that those are the right things. You're never going to have 100% perfect answer. It's going to be a mix of things. And the reason why is because there's humans involved. And when there's humans involved, it's not that clean cut. So I'm hoping that you'll feel empowered enough to be like, yes, 80% of what we know is good enough to build the strategy and the foundation for the roadmap, and to be able to get into market, pivot when needed, and to be smart about where you place your bets and your investments. So I've talked about this a lot. The net is to know your business, know it like the back of your hand. When the competition launches a new product, learn about it before anybody else. If the internal and external synthesis is about anomaly, you see a lot of anomalies, have a conversation with folks on your team. If you're a team of one, and you've got a friend who's a trusted a business person or a consumer, someone who might buy this product, chat about it. And it really requires kind of a love of what you do and a love of what you market. I've never been that in love with cars and marketing cars. And so I've never chased that as something that I wanted to work on, because it just doesn't interest me. So somewhat obvious, but I think it's important because you're going to go deep and you're going to look for the gold, and you're going to want to put it all together. And I put in here, be curiouser than the rest. And I know that's grammatically incorrect, but it is about a mindset of being open, creative, curious, questioning, and using that as the fuel to generate your strategy. And then lastly, I was going to give you a few examples. There's a creative kernel in everything. Even if you're selling manicure scissors, no offense to anyone who's on the call who sells manicure scissors, but there's always an interesting angle that you can find. And I would challenge anyone to that. Like, there's always an interesting aspect to how people use something. A while back, I worked on a campaign for a super premium ice cream, and we had a whole roadmap and strategy and tactics around it. But the creative kernel, well, what we found is, as I was talking to people who were testing this ice cream, was that they kept referencing it like crack. They would giggle. And I felt uncomfortable, at work, and people were talking about crack, but that was the word that kept coming up. And we're like, okay, well, how? We're not going to say it's like crack, eat it, and then come up with a strategy and tactics around that. But the creative kernel was like, this thing was like catnip. And so the reason why I bring that up is that creative idea, no matter what you're selling, can be applied to your marketing roadmap, to your tactics, to your site, to your messaging, and to your brand. So we didn't want to go the route of addictive because there's a lot of connotations around that, but we were comfortable with catnip. And so we use that for everything, including the tactics, even the look and feel of the tactics. So if there was an email campaign, it had a playful, open, catnip sort of, for lack of a better word, addictive quality to it. So find that. If you're talking to 3 or 4 people in sale and on your sales team or selling stuff, and everyone keeps saying how this product saves lives. I'm just making stuff up. How can you tap into that for your marketing strategy and for your roadmap and the tactics? If it's a lifesaver and say you're a hospital or something, you're marketing a hospital, does that mean non-COVID times? Does that mean you've got a health day where everyone comes and it's a lifesaver and there's a whole campaign around it? And that's what I mean by being open and expansive and really imagining like a whiteboard when you go to do these things. Marketing gets to take calculated fun risks as opposed to other departments. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the roadmap. The roadmap, when we think about terminology, kind of going back to that point, is really, to me, it's a plan, it's a guide, it's the thing that we hold that says this is what we're going after, and here's why we're going after it, and then here are the timeframes, goals, initiatives, and activities. And I'm going to show you some examples, but they're very rough examples. And the reason for that is because I want you to get the spirit and the idea and the thinking of how it's to go, but not get wedded to it, because it is about the ideas, the strategy, and how the tactics fall out of that, and then getting that onto a schedule and rinse and repeat. It's not about the document. It's about the quality of the thinking, how you know the business, and then just making sure that you've got an executional plan to get that. And chances are some of you on this call have done this many times. Just I want to go through this terminology really quick. Time frame, you guys understand that. What is the flow for activities? If you know that the product's launching in May, that's going to shift when you start the activities and how you get your work product. If you're having your goals on there, I think is really important. Just to reiterate, even if it's at the bottom, you're like, this is what we're going after. Here's how we're measuring it, and then the initiatives. So maybe there's a press tour, maybe there's a road show, maybe there's a sampling event at all the Costco's in Georgia because we know that's where the customers are, or maybe it's a website launch. All those things should be on your plan, and there should be themes of work. So, which the things I just described to you are tactics, sorry. But the main themes of work might be, say I'm launching an application. We really, product tells you and the CEO tells you, we really want to talk about innovation. Okay, well, that's a key theme, right? That comes out of our strategy. So we've got our theme. It's all about innovation. Okay, so all of our tactics should ladder underneath there, right? Sounds easy. But just making sure you're keeping yourself honest. And there's usually someone, I worked on the launch not too long ago, and we were just about to press go. And somebody said, we're going to have a message fly over the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming for the launch. And I was like, what? Cheyenne wasn't an important market based on the internal and external view that we'd done. Somebody within the company who was influential was like, we need to get this thing up in the air on a plane. Okay, so what do you do with that? You'll put it on your roadmap. But if you have control over those types of tactics, you might say that doesn't map to our launch and what we're trying to do. We don't know who's in Wyoming. We don't know why that's important. And so those things kind of come in because marketing is the favorite toy, right? And then activities are also known as tactics. That could be like a press release, an event, an email campaign, social, etc. So just making sure you have all that stacked together and how you're going to measure it. So this is what I call the basic. You guys will have access to this. If you're just starting from scratch and you don't have a ton of time to go uber deep, but you have enough that you think you can start laying down the foundation, put your goals. I don't recommend, I just kind of flesh this out, but I don't recommend having 8 goals, but that's a whole nother conversation. The the goal should be driven, the goals and the metrics should be tied together. But unless you have a gigantic 100-person marketing team, I would stick with 3. And then you want to show pretty quickly, how am I going to gauge the success? So back to my airplane flyover example. So maybe the marketing goal was announce that this new company is launching. And then under Q1, you'll see flyover over state of Cheyenne or state of Wyoming. So what is the success metric of that? Right. For awareness, what is that? What for consideration for a launch? What are those metrics? And be surgical. If it doesn't fit, throw it out and just make sure you have the rationale for who might ask, well, why isn't the plan a good idea? Well, these are our 3 success metrics, and that doesn't line up. But you essentially want to have a visual representation of all of those activities and how they're being measured. Another way of looking at it, depending on the type of business or nonprofit, is to do it in a program-based way. The first example that comes to mind here might be for a healthcare company when they're doing fall enrollment in November to get everybody their new health insurance. Could also be if you are at a larger company and there are 4 really important pieces of the business. You might want to make sure that you represent that as a program. So let me give you another example of that. Say you're doing a new company launch and your stakeholders are human resources, executives, influential people in the market who care. You'll want to group those by program so that you can show the stakeholders that you've got defined activities, KPIs, and tactics that all line up for those specific programs. So it's almost like the roadmap is twofold. One is so that you know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you've done the data dump to understand that. The other part is just for those other stakeholders. And I'm just going to flip real quick. Okay, I'm almost done. Next slide. This is something I specifically put in for startups. It's called the Canvanizer. It's a website. There'll be a link in the presentation when you get it. This is for you to get everything down onto paper quickly. All the things that I was talking about internal doesn't represent everything, but it is a nice way of synopsizing your business model and fleshing that out so that you check time real quick and encourage you to play with this. It's great for startups so they can just get it all into one place and start figuring out what they're working with. This is not a marketing roadmap. This is the step before the marketing roadmap. Or if you have 0 budget, this is where I would start and then just figure out what your activities are going to be. So hopefully that is useful for some of our startup friends, but it's really to boil everything down to its simplest form. Guidance for use, obviously complete the template, illustrate and tell your story. Make sure that you right size the template or presentation for the audience. If you're a startup, you might not need any of this. If you're a larger company, you may need multiple decks for different stakeholders. Maybe HR needs to see one view. Maybe the execs need a view. Maybe finance needs a budgetary view. They still need to understand the strategy, still need to understand why you're spending time on things, and they still need to understand why it's being measured. But really adapt everything to fit you and the decision makers in your orbit. And if you don't know what people are looking for, get me a plan. I've heard that so many times. Clarify that before you go through the exercise of the internal, external view and using the tools, because you can get down that rabbit hole. And then if they don't care about that, you'll have invested too much time. In closing, many ways. There is no one way. There is no foolproof way. You're creating what the standard is for your company, group, division, business, etc. Have fun with it. What's most important is that you understand your business, who you're serving, why, and you have a vision for what you want to create with your marketing. The template is a guide. Make sure you have the thinking and the measured actions, and add more creativity. Creativity is never talked about as of late in marketing, beyond like a slogan or a cool picture. But think about how you might want to reach audiences or influencers in ways that you haven't before. So take the tool and make it yours. And then lastly, bring that brain into the process. And again, this is really just to appeal to everyone from a creative, empowered place. as marketers, right? You're really being given the challenge to bring the business to life. You're the team, or you're the owner or the consultant or the person who can really bring this into fruition. Every other department has a different responsibility. Yours is to really create this traction, and it's different from sales. And that's it.